courier handed me the manila envelope at 4:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. I signed for it without reading the return address. My name is Daniel Rourke. I'm 44 years old, and 2 days earlier I'd been restructured out of my compliance director position at Whitehall Investment. The timing felt deliberate. I opened the envelope in my kitchen. Divorce papers. Not a conversation. Not even a text message warning me they were coming. Just legal documents with my wife's signature already in place. Melissa had left that morning for a client meeting. Her coffee mug sat in the sink, lipstick stain on the rim like always. Normal Tuesday routine. Nothing about this felt normal. I read through the filing twice. Standard language, clean execution. Her attorney had prepared everything efficiently. No drama, no emotion, just policy and procedure. That's when I noticed the date discrepancies. She'd filed 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks of normal mornings, normal dinners, normal conversations about weekend plans, all while knowing she'd already started the legal process. The settlement meeting was scheduled for Friday. 4 days to prepare. I didn't call her. Friday arrived with October rain tapping against the conference room windows. Melissa walked in with her attorney, a sharp-dressed man in his 50s who looked like he'd done this 1,000 times before. He smiled when he saw me. Not friendly, confident, like he already knew how this would end. "Daniel, good morning," Melissa said. Her voice had that professional tone she used with difficult clients, polite distance. I nodded, kept my hands folded on the table. Her attorney spread out the documents like he was dealing cards. "We've structured this to be straightforward, Mr. Rourke. Melissa retains primary ownership of the real estate brokerage she launched. Post-separation income streams remain with the earning party." The smirk never left his face. Here's what bothered me most. Melissa had been budgeting aggressively for weeks before my job termination. Separate checking account, new credit cards, moving money around like she was preparing for something. Cool behavior at home made sense now. Emotionless routines, no conversation beyond logistics. She'd been planning this longer than 3 weeks. "The house goes to Melissa," her attorney continued. "She'll assume the mortgage. Your $401k remains yours, minus the marital portion, calculated from the separation date." I noticed she'd already transferred our joint savings account. Smart timing, right after my severance package cleared, but before I could access it. "Any questions, Daniel?" Melissa asked. I looked at her across the conference table. Same woman I'd married 12 years ago. Same green eyes, same careful way of choosing words. Different person entirely. "No questions," I said. Her attorney slid the papers across the table. "Sign here, here, and initial there." I read every line, force of habit from 15 years in compliance. The fine print told the real story. She'd been moving assets for months. Her LLC formation date was listed as post-separation, but I remembered her business cards arriving while we were still married. Small detail, probably meaningless, but compliance work teaches you that small details matter most. I signed everything. Kept my head down, pen moving steadily across signature lines. "That's it," her attorney said, collecting the documents. "Clean dissolution, no contested assets, no ongoing disputes." He shook my hand like we'd just closed a business deal. Melissa gathered her purse. "I'll have my things out of the house by Sunday." They left together, talking quietly in the hallway. I could hear her laughing at something he said. I sat alone in the conference room for 10 minutes, watching rain streak down the windows. The cleaning crew was already setting up for the next meeting. Maybe they thought I was broken. Maybe they thought I'd given up. That was their first mistake. In compliance, you learn that the best investigations start with silence. You watch, you wait, you document everything, then you act. 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Curtis Lane called me. "Daniel, I know you're between positions right now," he said. "I've got something that might interest you." Curtis and I had worked together at Regional Trust 5 years back. Solid guy, methodical like me. He'd moved on to start a wealth advisory firm called Obsidian Partners. "Just consulting work," he continued. Help us build some compliance frameworks. Nothing formal, but it keeps you active. I needed the distraction. The house felt too quiet without Melissa's morning routine. I'll take a look, I told him. Obsidian's offices were downtown, sleek glass and steel. Curtis showed me to a small conference room with a view of the city. We're targeting mid-tier clients, he explained, small business owners, boutique firms, people who need wealth management but don't qualify for the big houses. He handed me a stack of intake forms. These are our prospective clients. See if you can spot any red flags. I started working through the files that afternoon. Standard due diligence, corporate structures, revenue streams, disclosure requirements. Then I saw a familiar name on the client list. Melissa Rourke Real Estate LLC. My pen stopped moving. I read the line again, making sure I wasn't seeing things. There it was. Her business name, contact information, even her estimated annual revenue. Curtis walked back into the room. Find anything interesting? This real estate firm, I said, pointing to Melissa's entry. When did they apply? Last week. Why? I checked the LLC formation date listed on her application. September 15th, 3 weeks after our separation date. But I remembered her business cards arriving in July, while we were still married. Just curious about the real estate market, I said. That night I went through my old email archives. 15 years of digital correspondence, all backed up and organized by date. What are the odds Melissa had been careless with her digital trail? I found what I was looking for in my deleted items folder. An email from July 18th that Melissa had forwarded to someone. The subject line read Business Formation Documents, Confidential. She'd sent it to her attorney. The same attorney who'd smirked through our settlement meeting. But here's the thing that made my blood run cold. The timestamp showed she'd sent it at 2:47 a.m. Who forwards business documents to a divorce attorney at 2:47 in the morning? I kept digging. Another email from early August. Melissa had CC'd her attorney on correspondence with a business banker. The subject line mentioned asset protection strategies. This was weeks before my job termination. Then I found the smoking gun. A calendar meeting request from Melissa's attorney to someone at Whitehall's HR department. The meeting was scheduled for August 22nd. I was terminated on September 3rd. You know what the worst part was? I'd been conducting an internal audit of executive bonus structures all summer. Found some questionable patterns in the compensation committee's decisions. Nothing criminal, but enough to make certain people uncomfortable. My audit report was due September 15th. I never got to file it. The timeline wasn't coincidental. Melissa had inside information about my job security, and she'd used it to position herself for the divorce. Someone at Whitehall had helped her. I closed my laptop and sat in the kitchen for 20 minutes. The coffee maker gurgled in the background, same sound it had made every morning for 12 years. Same kitchen, different life entirely. The next morning, I called Curtis back. I've reviewed the compliance frameworks, I told him. I'd like to accept a formal consulting role. Nothing public, just background support. That's great news, Curtis said. What changed your mind? I think I can help Obsidian target the right market segments. That afternoon, I submitted my recommendations to Curtis. Obsidian should focus on boutique service firms, real estate brokerages, small law practices, independent consultants. These businesses generate substantial revenue but often lack sophisticated financial planning, I wrote in my report. They're underserved by traditional wealth management firms. Curtis loved the strategy. You're right. These smaller firms have real money, but no one's paying attention to them. Exactly, I said. They're hungry for professional services, especially if we can offer them something their competitors don't have. Within a week, Obsidian had developed a targeted outreach campaign for boutique real estate firms in the Charlotte area. Melissa's firm was at the top of our prospect list. Curtis made the initial contact himself. Professional call, standard pitch about wealth management services for growing businesses. She was enthusiastic, Curtis reported back. Wants to schedule an onboarding meeting next week. I reviewed the onboarding checklist we'd prepared. Standard compliance documents, disclosure requirements, asset verification forms. All perfectly legitimate, all perfectly thorough. One suggestion, I told Curtis. Make sure we're extra careful with the disclosure requirements. Some of these smaller firms play fast and loose with their corporate structures. Good point, Curtis said. We can't afford any compliance issues. I helped draft the disclosure forms myself. Every question was standard industry practice. Every requirement was legally mandated, including the section about related business entities and asset transfers. Melissa scheduled her onboarding meeting for the following Tuesday. She'd be required to bring corporate documents, tax returns, and a complete list of business assets. Most importantly, she'd need to disclose any changes to her business structure in the past 12 months. The Nevada LLC she'd formed in secret, the asset transfers she'd made during our marriage, the timeline discrepancies between her divorce filing and her business formation. All of it would be documented in her own handwriting. Curtis called me the night before her meeting. I'm excited about this one, he said. Her revenue projections look solid. Just make sure she completes all the paperwork, I said. We need full disclosure for our compliance records. Of course, that's what you built the system for. I hung up and walked to my kitchen window. The same view I'd looked at every morning for 12 years. But tomorrow, Melissa would walk into Obsidian Partners carrying documents that would tell the real story of our divorce. She'd sign her name to disclosure forms I'd designed specifically for her situation, and she'd never know I was the one asking the questions. Sometimes the best revenge is just giving someone enough rope. You don't need to tie the knot. They'll do that part themselves. Melissa arrived at Obsidian Partners 15 minutes early on Tuesday morning. I watched from the conference room down the hall as Curtis greeted her in the lobby. She wore her navy business suit, the one she'd bought for closing high-end properties. Professional, confident, ready to impress. She had no idea I was 30 feet away, reviewing the compliance checklist I designed specifically for her. Mr. Lane, thank you for this opportunity, I heard her say as they walked past my door. I've been looking for a wealth management partner who understands boutique businesses. Curtis led her to the main conference room. We specialize in firms like yours, Ms. Rourke. Growing revenue, complex asset structures, need for sophisticated planning. I stayed in my office, door cracked just enough to hear the conversation. These are our standard onboarding documents, Curtis explained. Comprehensive disclosure forms, asset verification, corporate structure documentation. The papers rustled as he spread them across the table. It looks thorough, Melissa said. I appreciate attention to detail. If only she knew how much attention I'd paid to every single question on those forms. Take your time, Curtis told her. Accuracy is critical for compliance purposes. For the next hour, I listened to Melissa work through the paperwork. Occasional questions about specific clauses, brief phone calls to her accountant for tax information, normal due diligence sounds. Then Curtis knocked on my office door. She's finished, he said quietly. Everything looks complete. I walked to the conference room after Melissa left. Curtis had organized her documents in neat stacks, tax returns, corporate filings, asset declarations. How did it go? I asked. Smooth process. She seemed well prepared. I picked up her asset disclosure form, 23 pages of detailed information about her business structure, revenue streams, and related entities. Line 47 asked about subsidiary companies or related business entities formed within the past 24 months. Melissa had written none. Line 52 requested disclosure of any asset transfers exceeding $10,000, 0 cents, during the previous calendar year. She'd written N/A, no significant transfers. Both answers were lies. I knew about the Nevada LLC she'd formed in secret. I knew about the $47,000 she'd moved from our joint account to her business account 3 weeks before filing for divorce. She'd documented the lies in her own handwriting. I'll process these through our compliance review, I told Curtis. Sounds good. When do you think we'll have her approved? Give me a few days to run the standard checks. That evening, I accessed Obsidian's internal whistleblower reporting system. Every financial services firm has one. Anonymous channels for reporting compliance violations or suspicious activity. I'd helped design Obsidian's system myself. The interface was straightforward. Upload supporting documents, describe the potential violation, submit anonymously. I attached copies of Melissa's disclosure forms alongside the evidence I'd gathered from our divorce proceedings. The Nevada LLC formation documents, the asset transfer records, the timeline showing she'd lied about both items. In the description field, I wrote, "Prospective client has provided false information on mandatory disclosure forms. Evidence suggests intentional misrepresentation of corporate structure and asset transfers. Recommend immediate compliance review." I submitted the report at 11:47 p.m. The next morning, Curtis called me before 8 a.m. "We've got a problem with the Rourke account," he said. "Compliance flagged it for review." "What kind of problem?" "Anonymous tip came in. Says she provided false information on her disclosure forms." I paused for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to sound surprised, not long enough to seem suspicious. "That's serious," I said. "What's our protocol?" "Full legal review. We can't onboard anyone with potential disclosure violations." "Good call. Better safe than sorry." Obsidian's legal team took over from there. I stepped back completely, never mentioned Melissa's name in any internal discussions. Professional distance, clean hands. But I made sure to stay informed about the review process. The legal team found exactly what I'd expected them to find. Melissa's asset disclosure forms contained multiple false statements. Her business structure was more complex than she'd indicated. Most damaging was the timeline evidence. She'd formed the Nevada LLC while still married but claimed it was post-separation. She'd transferred marital assets to her business account but denied any significant transfers. Clear violations of Obsidian's disclosure requirements. The review took 8 days. On day 9, everything changed. Curtis called me at 6:30 p.m., voice tense. "We might have a complication with the Rourke situation," he said. "Someone on her team has connections to your old firm." My coffee went cold in my hand. "What kind of connections?" "Former Whitehall intern named Sarah Mitchell. She's working for Melissa now. Saw your name on some internal documents." "How much does she know?" "Enough to connect the dots. Melissa knows you're consulting with us." I set down my coffee cup carefully. 15 years of compliance work teaches you to expect complications. "What's Melissa's response?" "She called our managing director an hour ago. Wants to discuss the compliance review directly." Here's the thing about corporate legal processes. Once they start, they follow predetermined paths. Personal relationships don't matter. Office politics don't matter. Documentation matters. What did the managing director tell her? Standard response: "We're terminating your agreement. The risk was flagged by compliance." That's all I can say. I could picture Melissa's face when she heard those words, the same expression she'd worn when her attorney explained the divorce settlement terms. Confident control, suddenly slipping away. Is she pushing back? Tried to. Demanded to know who flagged her account. Threatened to file complaints with our regulatory board. And the managing director shut it down. Told her our compliance processes are confidential and non-negotiable. That night, I sat in my kitchen thinking about the conversation. Melissa had always been good at managing situations, controlling narratives, making people see things her way. But she'd never dealt with corporate compliance systems before. You can't charm a regulatory framework. You can't negotiate with documentation requirements. You can't smirk your way through a legal review. Either you disclosed everything truthfully, or you didn't. She didn't. Curtis called me the next morning with the final update. "It's over," he said. Legal team issued their determination. Multiple disclosure violations, potential fraud indicators. We're terminating all discussions with her firm. How did she take it? Not well. Her assistant called 3 times yesterday, trying to reach someone who would reverse the decision. I walked to my kitchen window. Same view I'd looked at every morning for 12 years, but something felt different now. For months, Melissa had controlled the timeline. The divorce filing, the asset transfers, the coordination with my job termination. She'd planned everything perfectly. Except for one detail. She'd forgotten that compliance work teaches you to think in systems, policies, procedures, documentation trails that can't be charmed or negotiated away. I never raised my voice, never confronted her directly, never broke the professional distance I'd maintained since signing those divorce papers. I just gave her the opportunity to document her own lies. Sometimes that's all it takes. 3 weeks after Obsidian terminated Melissa's agreement, I received an unexpected call from Curtis. "You need to see this," he said. "Check the Charlotte Business Journal website." I pulled up the article on my laptop. The headline made my coffee taste bitter in the best possible way. Local real estate broker under investigation for disclosure violations. Melissa's professional headshot stared back at me from the screen. Same confident smile she'd worn in our settlement meeting. The North Carolina Real Estate Commission has opened a formal investigation into Melissa Rourke Real Estate, LLC, following multiple complaints regarding business disclosure practices, the article read. Apparently, our compliance review at Obsidian had triggered additional scrutiny. When financial services firms flag potential violations, they're required to report certain findings to relevant licensing boards. Standard procedure, nothing personal, just policy. The investigation moved faster than I'd expected. Within 2 weeks, Melissa received a summons to appear before the state licensing board. I knew this because Curtis kept me updated on the ripple effects. Word travels quickly in Charlotte's business community. "She's treating it like a PR problem," Curtis told me over lunch. "Hired a communications consultant, issued statements about minor administrative oversights." How's that working out for her? Not well. One of her former clients filed a complaint saying she misrepresented her business structure during a major transaction. That client was Margaret Stevens, a retired teacher who'd trusted Melissa to handle the sale of her family home. Margaret had specifically asked about Melissa's business stability and financial backing. Melissa had apparently told her the business was fully established and properly structured. No mention of the Nevada LLC. No mention of the asset transfers. No mention of the recent divorce complications. Margaret felt deceived. Rightfully so. The licensing board hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in downtown Charlotte. I didn't attend, but Curtis had connections in the regulatory community. "She walked in like she owned the place," he reported later. Professional suit, confident handshake with the board members, stack of prepared documents. Melissa had always been good at working a room, making people like her, controlling the narrative. But regulatory hearings aren't networking events. The board reviewed her disclosure violations systematically. The Nevada LLC she'd failed to report, the asset transfers she denied, the timeline inconsistencies between her business formation and her divorce proceedings. Each violation was documented, dated, cross-referenced with her sworn statements. She tried to explain it as administrative confusion during a difficult personal transition, Curtis told me. The board wasn't buying it. Here's what Melissa didn't understand about compliance violations. Intent doesn't matter, results matter. Either you disclosed everything accurately, or you didn't. She didn't. The board issued their decision 2 hours after the hearing concluded. 6-month license suspension. Immediate effect. No criminal charges, but her professional reputation was effectively destroyed. The Charlotte Business Journal ran a follow-up article the next day. Real estate broker suspended for ethics violations. This time, they included details about the specific violations. Asset concealment, false disclosure statements, potential fraud indicators. Margaret Stevens was quoted in the article. "I trusted her with the most important financial transaction of my retirement. She lied to my face about her business practices. That quote went viral on local social media. Screenshots shared across neighborhood Facebook groups, next-door posts warning other residents. Within a week, 3 more clients had terminated their contracts with Melissa's firm. Her business partners started distancing themselves. Joint marketing agreements were quietly canceled. Referral relationships dried up overnight. The state licensing board also ordered an external audit of her firm's financials. Standard procedure for disclosure violations of this magnitude. I learned about the audit from Curtis, who heard it from a contact at the Regulatory Commission. They're bringing in forensic accountants, Curtis said. Full review of her business structure, asset transfers, corporate filings. How long does that typically take? 3 to 6 months. Depends what they find. What they found, apparently, was a pattern of questionable practices extending back to her business formation. The Nevada LLC wasn't just undisclosed, it was being used to route client deposits in ways that violated state regulations. The asset transfers from our joint account weren't just hidden from me, they'd been mixed with client funds in violation of trust account requirements. Each discovery triggered additional violations, additional penalties, additional publicity. 2 months after her suspension, Melissa's remaining clients had moved to other brokerages. Her office lease was in default. Her professional insurance had been canceled. That's when she made her final call to Curtis. She wanted to discuss the Obsidian situation, Curtis told me afterward. Said she had new information about her compliance review. What kind of information? Doesn't matter. I transferred her to our managing director instead. The managing director's response was exactly what I'd expected. Your onboarding file triggered the review. Compliance flagged it. That's all I can say. Curtis said Melissa had stayed on the line for 30 seconds after that. Just breathing, no words. Then she hung up. I imagine that's when it finally hit her. Daniel never yelled at her during the divorce, never fought back, never made dramatic accusations or emotional appeals. He just signed the papers and walked away quietly. But everything she'd built over the past year was now unraveling. Her business, her reputation, her financial security. All because she'd forgotten one simple truth about compliance systems. They don't care about your personal story. They only care about documentation. And she documented everything herself. The licensing board suspension, the client complaints, the regulatory violations, the forensic audit findings. All of it traced back to the disclosure forms she'd signed at Obsidian Partners. The forms I designed specifically for her situation. She'd walked into that conference room confident and prepared, ready to impress a prestigious wealth management firm. Instead, she'd signed her name to her own professional destruction. Sometimes, revenge isn't about getting even. Sometimes it's just about giving someone enough rope to hang themselves and making sure the documentation is thorough. The final notice arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in March. North Carolina Real Estate Commission letterhead. Official seal, standard bureaucratic language confirming that Melissa's 6-month suspension would stand as issued. No appeal had been filed. I read the notice twice, then filed it in my desk drawer next to the other correspondence from her case. Not because I needed the documentation anymore, just have it. 15 years of compliance work teaches you to keep records. Curtis had offered me a permanent position at Obsidian Partners the week before. You've been invaluable during this transition period, he had said. We'd like to make it official. I'd accepted. Good salary, reasonable hours, work that felt familiar. Most importantly, no one at Obsidian knew the full extent of my involvement in Melissa's compliance review. That's exactly how I preferred it. The small office space they'd given me was on the 3rd floor, corner unit with a view of downtown Charlotte. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. While cleaning out my temporary files that Friday evening, I found a folder I'd forgotten about. Rourke. Intake, archive. Inside were copies of all the documents from Melissa's onboarding process, her asset disclosure forms, corporate structure questionnaires, the signed statements she'd provided about her business practices. I pulled out the main disclosure form, 23 pages of her careful handwriting. Line 47. Related business entities formed within the past 24 months. Her answer? None. Line 52. Asset transfers exceeding $10,000, 0 cents during the previous calendar year. Her answer? N/A. No significant transfers. Both lies. Both documented in her own words. This single document had triggered everything that followed: the compliance review, the regulatory investigation, the licensing board suspension, the collapse of her business. All because she'd chosen to lie instead of telling the truth. I walked to the paper shredder in the corner of my office. Industrial grade model, the kind that turns documents into confetti. The disclosure form fed through the machine smoothly. 23 pages of evidence disappearing into thin strips of paper. No anger in the gesture, no sense of triumph or vindication. Just the practical act of disposing of documents that were no longer needed. The case was closed. The files could be destroyed. I gathered the remaining papers from the folder and fed them through the shredder as well. Corporate filings, tax documents, correspondence records, everything that connected me to Melissa's professional destruction. When the folder was empty, I placed it in the recycling bin. Then I turned off the office lights and locked the door. I left my temporary key on Curtis's desk with a note: "Office cleaned out, ready for the next consultant." Walking to my car in the parking garage, I thought about the past 6 months. Melissa had orchestrated my job termination and divorce with surgical precision. Planned every detail, controlled every timeline, anticipated every obstacle. Except one. She'd forgotten that compliance systems are designed to catch people who think they're smarter than the process. I'd never confronted her directly, never raised my voice, never made dramatic accusations. I'd just given her the opportunity to document her own lies. Sometimes, that's all it takes. The parking garage was quiet except for the sound of my footsteps echoing off concrete walls. I got in my car and drove home to the apartment I'd rented after the divorce. Different address, different life, same methodical approach to everything. Some things never change.